Right. So today I don't know if I'm preaching so much as teaching. I guess they're kind of the same thing, but I'm going to lean into a little bit about communion and how we approach the table with regards to young people. But I want to start by saying when it comes to communion, Jesus gave us very little instruction. All he said was to do this. Right? And he didn't exactly say the how. Right? He didn't put limits on it. He didn't say, you do this, you do not do that. He didn't say you have to be a certain age or you have to go through a certain level of education. Right? Jesus just said, do this in remembrance of me. And the church throughout its history has wrestled with how exactly do we observe communion together in a way that is both practical and reverent? How should we treat this gift? And that has changed a lot in history. In the early church, as these things were starting to be developed, even to be baptized, you had to go through like 2 years of rigorous instruction as an adult before you were even allowed to the font. Right? And then once you were baptized, it's not like you went straight from there to communion, because they had this idea that since communion is given for the forgiveness of sins, that once you receive it, you receive forgiveness. But then after that, if you were to sin again, you're out of luck. Right? So they would wait until the end, near as close to death as they could get, and then they would take communion. So they wouldn't be afraid about transgressing against God, and they would have that gift of forgiveness going to the grave. That was an older understanding of that. And I thank God that we have evolved away from that, because communion is not just something we reserve for the end of life, but as a gift meant to be received each and every week. Martin Luther talked about this. He talks about this in the Large Catechism, that communion is meant to be given each and every Sunday. And a lot of traditions in this country, maybe you grew up in a church, I don't know, I can't remember what St. Mark's history was, but communion used to be more infrequent. Maybe once a month you would get communion. There is zero theological basis for that. That was a practical reality when pastors were few and far between, and they had to travel around on the circuit, the itinerant circuit, preaching and doing sacraments. Right? So the pastor would literally ride into town on their horse. They'd do all the baptisms in that community. They would celebrate communion, and that pastor would move on to the next town. So that's why the once a month kind of became a practice for a lot of congregations. And I'm thankful that we here at St. Mark's are doing communion each and every week. That was one of the first pastoral moves I made in my first call, was to go from once a month to every week, because communion is a gift. It's a matter of pastoral care, I believe. We need this spiritual food for us and for our well-being. It is, as God says, we receive life and forgiveness through this sacrament. So it's important that we do it. But again, the how we do it, it continues to evolve. I have in my hand, I don't think anybody's old enough. Maybe some of your oldest might remember this. They used this. This came out in 1917. So none of y'all were alive when this was published. But this was the old service book. And I just want to read something out of here. The order for public confession, which is a Vesper service and should be appointed for the afternoon or the evening of the Friday or the Saturday preceding Holy Communion, when all who propose to commune shall be present. Right? How many of you were at confession on Friday or Saturday to receive communion today? Tom, I don't know where you're going on Thursdays and Fridays, right? But of course we didn't do this. We didn't have this separate service. But that was the attitude 100 years ago, that you would take the time to fast, to go to a special service of confession, and only then would you be able to approach communion on Sunday morning. I don't think I would last here that long if we implemented that policy. right? And the communion table would be, again, very small if we implemented that. Right? And of course, they did this. It was important that they did this. It's important that we come to communion with a sense of reverence, right? Of some level of understanding, some openness about our own sin and the need for God's grace and God's forgiveness. Right? And we do that most Sundays through our confession here in the morning. So we're doing that. We're confessing. We're setting ourselves right with God and orienting our hearts in the right way so that we can come forward to communion. Right? But here again, the who is important here. And I specifically want to talk about how we commune with young children. Because here at this congregation, if you're in the front, you may know some children are receiving a wafer when they come up. Right? And some of you are like, what's up with that? Why is this little kid receiving a wafer? Right? Martin Luther says that it is the parents that are the head priests of the household. Right? So when it comes to children communing at the age, parents have a large role in that. In my first call, I had children that were younger, about 5, who showed a desire and a longing to receive communion. And so I would sit with the parents and we'd talk about it. Do you think your kid's ready to receive communion? Right? And if so, we can do that together. Right? When I was in seminary, the idea of communing I've heard my colleagues giving communion to their kids, like my kids' age. I'm like, what are you doing? You can't do that, right? My own understanding has changed on this. I was far more conservative as a seminarian. But through my pastoral meeting, I've seen the importance that communion has in the lives of adults, but also in children too. Because when they gather here and they're listening, and we say the table is set and all is ready and all are welcome, and they come up and they put out their hands, what do we do? What do we do in that moment? And I've seen some parents slap the hand away, right? No, you can't do that. Like it's some dangerous thing that they're not allowed to touch. Right? There's that parable, and Jesus says, who, when your child asks for bread, would give them a snake or a stone, right? So when our child asks for good things, are we going to give it to them? Right? And that has to be a conversation. Right? That has to be a conversation between myself as the pastor and parents. If they have a child that is reaching out, right, my job is to look to them, to the parents for that nod, that yes, this is okay for my child, or no, I don't want to do that yet at this point. And there's ways we can go about instructing children. And again, in preparation for this, I kind of went back and looked at, I read Luther's teaching on this. The ELCA has a document called The Use and Means of Grace that talks about how to give communion and raise up this very question about age. Some traditions, first communion is in second grade. I believe the Catholic Church often does that. That second grade is when you have your first communion. Within the ELCA or Lutheran denominations, it's often around 5th grade or 6th grade, depending on the church. I think this congregation has a history around 5th grade of communing kids officially. My own first communion, I didn't know anything about it. I had a sleepover at a friend's house on a Saturday night. We got up, we went to church. It was a Catholic church. I got up with everybody else. And I just did what everybody else was doing, and I took communion, didn't know anything about it. And then a year later at my home church, when I was ready to be instructed, only then that I learned that, hey, I wasn't supposed to take that then. That experience has informed how I think about it now and about when the time is right. And there's no wrong time to receive communion. There's no right age, I don't think. Because if we talk about you have to be able to understand communion in order to receive it, who among you here fully understands what communion is? My hand's not up either. Because it is a mystery and it's a gift to us, and our understanding of it is imperfect. And so we say, well, you have to wait until you fully understand it. Then none of us is going to get it, right? Because we can't understand it. We can grasp parts of it, but we can never have perfect understanding of what this gift of communion is, right? Because it is so powerful. And so it's slowly become our practice here. For when people reach out their hands, when the littlest reach out, to have that look, that nod to the parent, is this okay? Is this something you want to do? Right? And if you're not ready for that, talk to me when it's time. When you think your child is ready, we can sit down and we can talk about that. And we can offer them the bread, we can offer them the wine at a younger age. And then when they get older, then we can start teaching them more about this. And Luther speaks about this too, about how the process of learning about what communion is not a one and done thing. It's an ongoing process throughout our life as people of faith. We are always learning more about it. We are always learning like how it impacts us and how it feels when we receive those gifts. And it's our job to share that with God's people. And so I want to thank you for being a congregation where there is room at the table for all of God's people. And I'm thankful to have this conversation, this lesson with all of you, because I think it's important that you adults understand the logic and the reasoning about why we want to include youth in what we do in worship. And if you'd only see how important it is for the kids that are receiving it, if you were here on Wednesday nights to see how our youth are practically fight over the opportunity to be able to serve communion, and how happy they are when they come up to receive it. It is a gift for those young people. It's helping to shape their life as disciples in Christ. And at the end of the day, and we've sung this, and some of the music that Thomas introduced, this is God's table. It's not yours or mine. This is God's table. We're just the servers. And you all are God's guests. So may young and old come and take their place at God's table. Amen.